It begins with the sound of cutlery, silver clinking against porcelain, a quiet dinner table, and a mother's laughter slicing through her son's dignity. She leans back, smirking. "You call that a life?" she says. And in that moment, something inside him breaks, not with rage but revelation. Because this wasn't about failure. It was about control. Every insult, every cold glance, every withheld approval, all part of a quiet system that keeps you small while making them feel large. The family dinner table was never just about food. It was the altar where power was distributed, and submission was taught. You see, every family carries its own kingdom, and in most of them there's always one crowned by shame, the scapegoat, the outcast, the one everyone secretly fears will become greater than the rest. So they starve him, not of food, but of validation. They feed him guilt until he learns to bow, and when he finally breaks free, when he builds something real, they mock it, because his rise exposes their dependence. But the son that night? He didn't flinch, he didn't fight, he just smiled. Because he knew something his family didn't. The receipts, the quiet proof of every bill he'd paid, every debt he'd erased, every hidden sacrifice they took for granted. He'd been their invisible provider while they labeled him failure. When he stood up and placed the papers on the table, no one breathed. The mother's smirk vanished. The father looked down. Even the walls seemed to lean in closer, like witnesses to judgment. What they didn't know, what most don't, is that moments like these are mirrors of a far older ritual, one that traces back to ancient Rome, when sons were branded with their father's failures, then sent into exile, only to return with the truth carved into their scars. The act of exposure, the revealing of hidden debt, wasn't rebellion, it was reclamation. That night wasn't just a dinner, it was initiation. The moment when a man stops living as someone's dependent dream and starts standing as the architect of his own dominion, because every failure story ever told by those above you was designed to keep you beneath them. And when you finally pull out the receipts, not just the financial ones but the spiritual ones, you reclaim something ancient, your throne. The descent has begun. Most men think shame is born in the moment, a look, a word, a sneer. But that's the illusion. Shame is engineered. It's an ancient instrument, refined through centuries of manipulation. The dinner table was never just a family scene, it was the prototype of empire. The same dynamics that crushed one man under his mother's laughter are the same dynamics that built kingdoms, by teaching obedience through emotional scarcity. In ancient Mesopotamia, priests discovered something dark, that fear mixed with love creates unbreakable loyalty. So they blended both into religion, then into bloodlines, and finally into family. You worship the same hands that wound you. You crave the approval of those who poison you. The architecture of humiliation is not chaos, it's precision. That's why the son's story is not just personal. It's a reflection of the human condition. Every man who's ever been mocked for dreaming, silenced for questioning, or shamed for rising above the script, he's been trapped in that same invisible design. The system never needed chains. It needed mothers who mocked ambition, teachers who laughed at failure, and friends who called dreams delusion. A perfectly engineered web of subtle assassins. And every time you start to wake up, they remind you of your place. They say, "Be realistic." They say, "You've changed." And in their tone hides the real command, "Return to your cage." But once you've seen the blueprint, you can't unsee it. You begin to realize that control is never maintained through strength, only through guilt. The most powerful men in history didn't just learn to overcome shame, they learned to weaponize it. To recognize when it was being used as a leash, and burn it. So when the son placed those receipts on the table, he wasn't just revealing numbers, he was performing an exorcism. He stripped power from the old architects, the ones who fed off his inferiority. That's what every awakening feels like, not triumph, but detachment. A cold silence when you realize you no longer need their permission to exist. The room fell quiet that night, not because of money, but because truth entered. And truth, when spoken without fear, is the most violent sound in the world. The architects of control hate that sound. Because once one man sees the design, the whole structure starts to shake. There's a reason every empire begins at a table. The Romans feasted while the slaves served. The bankers dined while kings begged for loans. The high priests ate in silence while the faithful starved outside the gates. Control was never just about armies or laws. It was about dependency. The same dynamic that played out between a mocking mother and her silent son now stretches across nations, governments, and institutions. You think the economy is about money? It isn't. It's about energy, human attention, obedience, and belief. The real currency is psychological submission. They make you doubt yourself, so you'll trade your sovereignty for validation. They make you feel like a failure, so you'll work harder, not for freedom, but for their approval. The invisible hand of the market is not economics. It's emotional control, dressed in numbers. Look closely. The same tone that dripped from the mother's lips. You'll never be enough. Echoes in advertising, politics, religion, and culture. You're told to consume to prove your worth, to follow to find belonging, and to obey to earn love. But who profits when you forget your own value? The system does. It's a parasitic design, and it's old. Babylon mastered it first. They understood that to control the masses, you don't need chains, you need insecurity. Keep a man questioning his worth, and you can make him build your empire while believing it's his own. The son at that dinner wasn't just confronting his family. He was confronting the archetype of dependency itself. When he revealed the receipts, he broke the oldest illusion, that worth must be granted from above. The real empire trembles when one man stops needing external validation. Because every man who reclaims his inner authority becomes ungovernable. And the modern world fears ungovernable men. The ones who no longer flinch at rejection, who no longer kneel for approval, who no longer play roles written by others. That's why history hides them. That's why the textbooks erase the heretics, the renegades, the men who stopped feeding the system. The truth is simple. You were never supposed to serve the table. You were meant to own it. And when you finally realize that, the economy of power collapses around you. The first lie they teach you is not written in any book. It's spoken in lullabies. Soft words and gentle tones, wrapped in love but sharpened underneath. Be good. Don't question. Respect authority. Wait your turn. And before you can even walk, the world has already begun carving its script into your mind. You were not raised. You were programmed. It begins with obedience disguised as virtue. They tell you that compliance makes you kind, humility makes you moral, and sacrifice makes you noble. But what if those were the chains? What if humility was a system designed to keep you small? A psychological chokehold passed down through culture and religion. From the moment you enter school, you learn not to think but to repeat. You learn not to lead but to submit. You're graded on how well you follow, not how deeply you question. The loudest minds are labeled disruptive, and the most original are called problematic. They clip your wings, then mock you for not flying. The script of servitude has always been the same. Obey the teacher. Respect the priest. Trust the politician. And when you feel doubt, pray, pay, or apologize. This is how the system maintains itself, by breeding guilt in those who could outgrow it. Even family plays its role. The mother who laughed at her son's failure wasn't evil. She was repeating the same programming forced upon her. Her laughter wasn't born from power but from fear. The fear that her son might escape the invisible prison she never could. When one link in the chain starts to break free, the rest of the chain tightens. The greatest secret of all is that servitude is self-sustaining. The rulers no longer need to enforce it. People police themselves, shaming each other for wanting more, punishing each other for thinking differently, and destroying the few who see the pattern. But once you notice the script, you can rewrite it. The same obedience that kept you bound can become precision. The same humility that silenced you can become patience. You turn their weapon into your tool, and in doing so you begin the process of unlearning. Because the real rebellion isn't loud, it's quiet. The air tighten. A pressure, a reckoning. The mother's laughter faltered. The father's authority shrank into the corner of his chair. The hierarchy, built through years of emotional taxation, collapsed in a single breath. Because that's the hidden law of power. What you give attention to, you feed. What you withdraw awareness from, you starve. For years the son had been fueling their dominion by trying to please them, by proving himself, by reacting to every insult. The moment he stopped defending, the empire fell. It's the same mechanism that governs nations. Empires don't crumble when people fight. They crumble when people stop believing. That's the true meaning of rebellion. Not chaos but starvation of the system's illusion. The great reversal has happened many times before, buried in forbidden history. When peasants in 14th century France stopped paying church tithes and started burning records. When slaves in Rome began speaking in code, passing secret names for freedom. When scholars in Alexandria hid knowledge in myths to protect it from priests. Each time the same pattern, withdrawal of belief, reallocation of awareness, reversal of power. That dinner table was a microcosm of all of it. A family turned empire. A son turned heretic. A meal turned revolution. But the price of reversal is isolation. The moment you reclaim power, you lose belonging. That's why most men stay silent. They'd rather be accepted in chains than alone in freedom. But those who walk out of the house of manipulation, they never return the same. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt the moment your energy began flowing backward, when fear turned to clarity, then you already know what's happening. The reversal has begun within you too. Now, before we descend deeper, before the next veil tears, I want you to comment this phrase twice below to anchor your transformation. The throne returns to the one who remembers. Write it twice, lock it in, because what comes next will test that memory. Memory is the true battlefield. Not land, not money, not blood, memory. Whoever controls what you remember controls who you are. The son at that dinner didn't just remember insults, he remembered his story differently. That's what broke the spell. Because institutions, like families, like empires, survive by engineering selective amnesia. From the moment you can think, you're told what to remember and what to forget. They teach you national myths instead of truth, heroes instead of manipulators, dates instead of patterns. You're conditioned to memorize your place in the order, but never the design behind it. Memory becomes a cage lined with nostalgia. And every time you question it, they call it betrayal. Families do it first. Remember what we did for you, remember who fed you, remember to be grateful. Gratitude weaponized becomes guilt, and guilt becomes obedience. You remember what they want you to. The moments of kindness, not the years of control. It's emotional bookkeeping, an ancient psychological tax. Then schools refine it. They erase forbidden history, the rebellions that succeeded, the thinkers who escaped the mold. They call them conspiracies, myths, dangerous ideas. Because if you remembered what you truly are, a free and self-defining being, their entire structure would collapse overnight. The same pattern threads through religion, politics, and even media. You are shown what to fear, what to trust, what to love. Repetition replaces reflection. And over time you begin to forget your own voice. You remember their rhythm instead. But the son remembered something different that night. He remembered the bills they didn't pay. The years he kept the lights on. The nights he worked while they slept. He remembered truth, not illusion. And when truth is remembered fully, power transfers. That's the secret behind every awakening. The restoration of uncorrupted memory. To reclaim your memory is to reprogram the timeline. It means remembering your own power, your own patterns, your own hunger. Once you do, you start seeing how every humiliation was engineered, and how every failure was a setup for obedience. The machinery of memory still operates all around you, in your phone, your faith, your family. But once you catch its hum, you can dismantle it, because remembering fully is rebellion, and every man who remembers truth becomes uncontrollable. You carry the new temple of control in your pocket. It hums, it glows, it listens, it learns you better than you know yourself. You call it convenience, but it's scripture, written not in words but in code, and behind that code, ancient hands still guide the pattern. The machinery of obedience has simply evolved, from altars and pulpits to screens and feeds. In the old world, control was blunt. Kings ruled through fear, priests through guilt, families through shame. But modern power is elegant. It doesn't punish. It seduces. It tells you that you are free, while it measures every choice you make. You scroll, you click, you confess your desires, and the system studies you. Every doubt, every craving, every insecurity becomes data, and data becomes doctrine. You think algorithms exist to entertain you? No. They exist to predict you, to mirror your habits until you forget you have any. They don't force you to kneel, they teach you to prefer submission. Each notification a breadcrumb, each headline a whisper, each ad a sermon. The son who once sat silent at the dinner table now stares into a digital one. Millions of voices laughing, judging, validating, shaming. The ritual continues. The difference is scale. Where his mother's laughter once stung, now the entire network echoes it. The system no longer needs a single authority, it's decentralized manipulation, control disguised as connection. And yet the pattern is the same. They trigger emotion to extract energy, anger, outrage, envy. They feed the machine. Attention is the new tithe. You pay it daily, in silence. And the architects grow rich off your reactions. But there is a moment, a narrow, trembling moment, when a man sees it, when he stops scrolling, when the noise stills, when he realizes he's been hypnotized by design. That's when the algorithm breaks, because it cannot predict stillness. It cannot control awareness. Freedom begins in that gap between impulse and choice, when you see the hook before you bite. That's where sovereignty lives now. Not in land or gold, but in undivided attention. Once you master that, you're no longer a user. You become the observer, and observers cannot be owned. They told you progress meant freedom, that the future would liberate you, that more machines, more comfort, more efficiency would finally end suffering. But progress, as we know it, was never about liberation. It was about domestication. The cult of progress doesn't free men, it tames them. Every civilization creates its myth of advancement, a holy story that justifies obedience. In ancient times, it was divine right. In the industrial age, it was productivity. Now it's technology. You're told to worship the new, to discard the old, to kneel before the algorithm and call it evolution. But behind every new machine stands an old hunger, control disguised as convenience. The same priests who once guarded temples now guard patents. The same monarchs who taxed your land now tax your data. The names change, the throne remains. And the masses, blind with pride, call it progress. Look at history's pattern. Every great leap forward required a deeper surrender. The printing press gave birth to censorship. Electricity birthed surveillance. The internet, total observation. Each tool promised freedom, and each one built a stronger cage. The architects of the cult knew that man would never willingly return to chains, so they forged invisible ones. They made control feel like participation. They turn labor into identity, consumption into purpose, and slavery into choice. You don't fight the system now, you subscribe to it. The son who once stood over that dinner table, holding his proof of independence, now walks through a digital empire of dependency. His rebellion taught him one truth: control doesn't vanish, it upgrades. It adapts to your language, your lifestyle, your pride. They tell you we're advancing, but toward what? A world where you no longer need to think because the system thinks for you? A world where comfort has replaced courage and distraction has replaced destiny? That isn't progress. That's pacification. And that's the secret the cult hides best. The future is not coming for you, it's consuming you. Each new innovation is another mouth in the dark, feeding on your time, your will, your awareness. True progress isn't in the machines, it's in the mind that refuses to be programmed by them. Empires no longer burn books, they bury them under noise. In the old world, censorship was a blade. Today, it's a fog. The truth doesn't disappear, it drowns. Drowned beneath a flood of entertainment, opinion, and distraction until no one remembers what silence even feels like. And in that confusion, obedience becomes effortless. This is the empire of silence. Not absence of sound, but absence of meaning. They've perfected it. You're free to speak, but no one listens. You can post, argue, shout, but every voice becomes static. The louder the world gets, the less it says. And in that chaos, those who control attention control perception. They decide which truths survive, not by banning them, but by burying them under noise. Once the son had to endure his mother's laughter. Now men endure a world that laughs at everything: tragedy, courage, even truth itself. Sarcasm has become the language of slaves who think they're free. You mock what you should question. You joke about what you should fight. It's not humor, it's anesthesia. The architects of this empire learned long ago that people fear silence, because silence reveals truth. So they filled every gap with content, endless scrolling, endless talking, endless stimulation. They made you uncomfortable with your own thoughts. And when you can no longer sit quietly, you can no longer think independently. That's how control works now. Through distraction, through fatigue, through emotional flooding. You're not silenced by threat, you're silenced by saturation. And every moment of entertainment is another brick in the empire's wall. But there's something they can't predict: silence reclaimed by will. When a man chooses quiet, not as absence but as rebellion, something shifts. The static thins, the fog parts, and the truth, raw, unfiltered, ancient, begins to whisper again. The son knew this. He didn't argue that night. He didn't scream. He spoke once, laid down the proof, and let silence devour the room. That silence wasn't weakness. It was judgment. It was the sound of power returning to its rightful place. The empire of silence fears that sound more than any riot, because when one man falls still and sees, truly sees. The empire begins to crumble from within. Language was once a weapon forged by gods, the first tool of creation. In the beginning was the word, they said. But few ever ask whose word. Because language, like power, has always belonged to those who define it first. Words shape thought, thought shapes action, and action shapes worlds. The architects of control learned this before any war, any empire, any system. To enslave a people, you don't cage their bodies, you cage their vocabulary. They did it with religion. They replaced sovereignty with obedience. They replaced discipline with devotion. They taught you that humility was holy. While they crowned themselves divine, they did it with politics. They called theft taxation. They called propaganda news. They called submission civility. They did it. With family, respect your elders became never question the source. Love became duty, and forgiveness became the chain that kept you returning to your abuser. Every generation inherits a corrupted dictionary, words drained of their original power, and those who try to speak the old meanings are branded dangerous, delusional, conspiratorial. Because true language is dangerous. It cracks illusions, it rebuilds thought, it restores sovereignty. The son at the dinner table learned this truth instinctively. He didn't argue semantics, he didn't fight definitions. He simply redefined the moment. Failure became foundation. Debt became proof. Silence became authority. In a single act, he rewrote the lexicon of power in that room, and everyone felt it. That's why the system polices speech so aggressively, not to protect people, but to protect definitions. Every banned word, every censored phrase, every public apology is a ritual of linguistic obedience. They're not afraid of hate, they're afraid of meaning. Because meaning cannot be monetized, predicted, or controlled. So understand this, if they can name your limits, they can build your cage. But if you reclaim the language of your own reality, the cage dissolves. Every time you speak truth in a world that demands compliance, you rewrite the code. You hack the spell. You shift the meaning back into your hands. The tongue was never meant to flatter. It was meant to command. And once you remember that, your voice becomes law. They no longer need idols made of stone. They built a new altar, the mirror. And they taught you to worship the face that looks back. Not out of love, but distraction. You chase perfection, status, validation, image. All reflections, never substance. The mirror god feeds on attention, and in your era, attention is faith. Every scroll, every selfie, every like is a tiny prayer whispered to the idol of self. It promises individuality, yet it creates uniformity. Everyone trying to stand out ends up identical, filtered, polished, hollow. This is the final architecture of control, a prison where you are both prisoner and warden. You maintain your own captivity by mistaking the mirror for meaning. In the ancient temples of Egypt, they warned of this. The priests of Thoth said the last age of man would come when reflection would devour reality, when people would forget the difference between image and essence. You are living in that prophecy now. You no longer ask, who am I? You ask, how am I perceived? The son in our story faced this god too. After the dinner, after the silence and the reversal, he went home and looked in the mirror. For years he had seen failure, guilt, unworthiness. But that night the reflection trembled. It no longer looked like him. It looked like everything he'd been told to be, the obedient son, the humble servant, the reflection that served others comfort. So he did what few dare to do. He stopped looking. He closed his eyes and listened instead. And in the dark behind his eyelids, he found something older than reflection. Awareness, presence, power. That is the heresy of this age, to look away from the mirror and inward toward the source. Because once you see what you truly are, not the image, not the name, not the history, the system loses its last hold on you. The mirror god starves. The empire fades. The architects built everything, religion, politics, technology, to keep you staring at reflections. But the truth is not found there. It's found in the silence that follows when you finally turn away. So hear this, you are not the reflection. You are the fire that makes it visible. And when that fire wakes, the world remembers who built it. The descent ends here, but your ascent begins now.